The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people looked up at the night sky and wondered what secrets waited in the darkness between worlds. In the year 2347, those secrets finally revealed themselves, and they were far more terrible than anyone had imagined. Captain Daniel Harper stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Horizon's Edge, watching the endless black void through the main viewing window. His ship had been traveling through the Kepler 442 system for 3 weeks, mapping planets and collecting data. It was supposed to be a simple mission. Nothing about it was supposed to change the fate of humanity forever. Lisa Monroe, his first officer, sat at the communications station. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and a mind that worked faster than most computers. When her console began to flash with an unknown signal, she leaned forward with curiosity rather than fear. "Captain," she said, her voice calm but serious, "I'm picking up a transmission. It is not human." Daniel felt his heart beat faster. First contact. Every space explorer dreamed of this moment. He walked to her station and looked at the strange symbols scrolling across the screen. "Can you decode it?" he asked. Lisa nodded slowly. "It will take time, but yes. The pattern is complex, but there is logic to it." 3 hours later, she had her answer. The signal came from a massive space station hidden behind the system's largest moon. The message was an invitation. Whoever had sent it wanted to meet. Daniel reported his discovery to Earth Command. The response came quickly. Humanity's leaders were excited. They sent Ambassador Kevin Price to negotiate with these mysterious aliens. He was a skilled diplomat, a man who had ended wars with words alone. Everyone believed he was the right choice. The aliens called themselves the Valorian Dominion. They controlled a vast empire spanning thousands of star systems. 12 different species worked together under their banner, and they had ruled this part of the galaxy for over 40,000 years. When Ambassador Price arrived at their station, they greeted him with smiles and promises. "We welcome humanity to the galactic community," said their leader, a tall being with silver skin and 4 arms. "We offer you technology, knowledge, and friendship. Together, we will achieve great things." Kevin Price felt hope bloom in his chest. He imagined a future where humans traveled freely among the stars, learning from ancient civilizations and sharing their own discoveries. He signed preliminary agreements and sent glowing reports back to Earth. But not everyone was so trusting. Amanda Torres was a young communications specialist assigned to the diplomatic mission. She had a habit of listening to channels she was not supposed to monitor. One night, while the ambassadors slept, she intercepted a Valorian transmission that was meant to be private. The words she translated made her blood run cold. "The humans are perfect specimens," the message read. "Strong bodies. Adaptive minds. They will serve well in the mining colonies. Begin integration procedures once the treaty is signed." Their leaders suspect nothing. Amanda ran to Ambassador Price's quarters and pounded on his door. She showed him the transmission, her hand shaking as she held the datapad. The color drained from his face as he read. "We need to warn Earth," he whispered, "right now." But they were already too late. The first explosions hit the human colony on New Providence, just as the sun was rising over its capital city. Valorian warships appeared from nowhere, filling the sky with fire and death. Buildings crumbled. People screamed and ran, but there was nowhere to hide. The aliens had planned this attack for months, waiting until humanity's guard was down. Across 3 star systems, the same horror unfolded. Colony after colony fell under the Valorian assault. Ships were destroyed before they could escape. Defense stations were overwhelmed in minutes. The aliens moved with terrible efficiency, crushing all resistance with overwhelming force. On the diplomatic station, Valorian soldiers burst into Ambassador Price's quarters. They dragged him and Amanda Torres to a detention cell without explanation. The smiling hosts of yesterday had become cold-eyed captors. "You should feel honored," one guard told them. "Your species has been selected for integration into the Dominion. You will serve us for generations to come." News of the attacks reached Earth within hours. People gathered in the streets, staring at screens that showed burning cities and fleeing refugees. Families wept for loved ones on distant worlds. Fear spread like a disease, infecting every heart with its poison dot. The Valorian Dominion broadcast their demands across all human channels. Their message was simple and cruel. Humanity would surrender unconditionally. All humans would be relocated to designated work zones. Resistance would result in the destruction of Earth itself. Many people wanted to give up. What chance did humanity have against an empire that had dominated the galaxy for 40,000 years? Their technology was primitive in comparison. Their military was small and scattered. Logic said that surrender was the only option. But humans had never been very good following logic. Catherine Shaw was the Secretary General of the United Nations, the highest authority on Earth. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. But when she spoke, the world listened. On the day after the attacks, she stood before the cameras and addressed not just Earth, but every human being scattered across the stars. "They believe we are weak," she said, her voice steady and strong. "They believe we will break. They believe that because we are young, we are easy prey. They are wrong." She paused, letting her words sink into the hearts of billions. Our ancestors survived ice ages and plagues. They crossed oceans in wooden ships and built civilizations from nothing. They faced extinction 100 times and refused to die. That same fire burns in us today. Across the planet, people stopped running. They stopped crying. They listened. "The Valorian Dominion wants slaves," Secretary General Shaw continued. "They will not find any here. They want surrender. They will receive only defiance. They want us to kneel." Her eyes hardened like steel. "Humanity does not kneel. Not today. Not ever. We will fight them with everything we have. We will make them regret the day they looked upon our world with hungry eyes. And when this war is over, the galaxy will remember one truth." She leaned closer to the camera, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "You do not touch Earth and survive." The broadcast ended. Silence hung over the world for a long moment. Then, slowly, something changed. Fear transformed into anger. Despair became determination. Across every continent, people began to prepare for war. The galaxy had tried to enslave humanity, and had no idea what it had awakened. 6 months had passed since the Valorian Dominion attacked humanity. 6 months of blood, fire, and chains. The aliens now controlled 4 of the 7 human colony worlds, and millions of people lived as slaves under their cruel rule. On the occupied world of Haven's Rest, the morning began like every other day. The sound of electric whips cracked through the cold air as Valorian overseers drove human workers toward the mining pits. Men, women, and even children marched in long lines, their faces empty of hope. The aliens had taken everything from them. Their homes, their freedom, their dignity. Ryan Mitchell watched from the shadows of a collapsed building. He was 32 years old, with rough hands and eyes that had seen too much suffering. Before the invasion, he had been a construction worker. Now he led a resistance cell of 40 fighters who refused to accept slavery. "How many guards today?" whispered the woman beside him. Her name was Samantha Cole. She was a doctor who had chosen to stay behind when the evacuation ships left. She could have escaped to free human space, but she refused to abandon the wounded and sick who needed her skills. 12 at the main gate, Ryan replied quietly. Another 8 patrolling the perimeter. Too many for a direct attack. Samantha nodded. Then we continue with the original plan. I will get inside the camp through the medical supply entrance. You make sure the communication relay is ready. Their mission today was not to fight. It was to send information. Every week, Ryan's cell gathered evidence of Valorian atrocities. Videos of executions. Records of starvation rations. Lists of the dead. This information was smuggled through a network of brave couriers to free human space, where it fueled the fire of resistance. Samantha pulled her worn coat tighter and walked toward the labor camp. The guards barely looked at her. She was just another broken human, or so they believed. They did not see the data chip hidden in her medical bag, filled with names of every Valorian officer responsible for war crimes. Meanwhile, far from the occupied territories, humanity was preparing its response. Earth had become a fortress. Every factory worked day and night producing weapons and ships. Every able person contributed to the war effort. The planet that had once been divided by politics and borders now stood united against a common enemy. Admiral Christopher Wells commanded the defense effort from a bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. He was an old soldier with white hair and a face carved from stone. He had fought in 3 wars during his lifetime, but nothing had prepared him for this challenge. "Show me the latest production numbers," he ordered his staff. The screens around him lit up with data. Ship construction was ahead of schedule. Weapon development was progressing faster than expected. Troop training programs were producing soldiers at an impressive rate. But it was still not enough. The Valorian Dominion had thousands of warships. Humanity had less than 100. "We need an edge," Wells muttered to himself. "Something they do not expect." That edge came from an unlikely source. Nicole Barrett was the chief engineer at the Geneva Research Facility. She was young for her position, only 28 years old, but her mind worked in ways that amazed even the most experienced scientists. For months, she had been studying captured Valorian equipment, searching for weaknesses. One night, while everyone else slept, she found what she was looking for. "The shields," she whispered, staring at her computer screen. "Their shields have a gap." Valorian defensive technology was considered unbeatable. Their ships could absorb enormous amounts of damage without suffering any harm. But Nicole discovered that certain electromagnetic frequencies could pass through their barriers like light through glass. Human weapons could be modified to exploit this weakness. She called Admiral Wells immediately, not caring that it was 3 in the morning. "Sir, I found it," she said breathlessly. "I know how to hurt them." Within days, every human weapon was being redesigned. The modification was simple but effective. Suddenly, the unbeatable Valorian shields became just another obstacle to overcome. While humanity prepared for war, the Dominion grew impatient with their new slaves. High Coordinator Vethran was the Valorian official responsible for human integration. He was ancient by human standards, having lived for over 2,000 years. In all that time, he had overseen the enslavement of 17 different species. None had caused him as much trouble as these strange creatures from a small blue planet. Human slaves kept escaping. Human workers sabotaged equipment. Human prisoners refused to break no matter how harshly they were punished. It was frustrating beyond measure. Vethran traveled to Earth to deliver an ultimatum in person. He stood before the United Nations, surrounded by armed guards, and looked down at the gathered human leaders with contempt. "Your resistance is pointless," he announced. "The Dominion has ruled this galaxy since before your species learned to walk upright. You cannot fight us. You cannot defeat us. Your only choice is submission." He spread his forearms wide, as if embracing the entire room. "Surrender now, and we will be merciful. Continue this foolishness, and we will burn your world to ash." The chamber was silent. Every eye turned to Secretary General Shaw, who sat calmly in her seat as if she were listening to a weather report instead of threats of genocide. She stood slowly, straightening her jacket with careful precision. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the room. "You think you know us," she said. "You have read our history. You have studied our biology. You have calculated our military strength. But you have missed something important." Vethran tilted his head, curious despite himself. "And what is that?" Shaw smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We remember everything." The words seemed simple, but their meaning was deep. Humanity remembered every enslaved person, every destroyed colony, every murdered child. They remembered, and they would never forgive. "You came here expecting fear," Shaw continued. "You found only patience. We have been waiting, High Coordinator. Waiting and preparing. When we strike, you will learn what happens to those who try to chain humanity." Vethran laughed, but something in his chest felt cold. He dismissed the feeling as he returned to his ship. These humans were primitive fools. They had no chance against the might of the Dominion. He was very, very wrong. Hidden in the asteroid belt beyond Mars, 200 warships waited in silence. Their crews trained every day, preparing for the moment when they would emerge from hiding and remind the galaxy why humanity should never be underestimated. On Haven's Rest, Ryan Mitchell received a coded message from Earth Command. He read it 3 times to make sure he understood correctly. Then he smiled for the first time in months. "What is it?" Samantha asked. He handed her the message. Her eyes widened as she read the words. "Operation Thunderhead is ready," she whispered. "They are coming." Ryan nodded, looking out at the stars through a broken window. "Tell everyone. Tell them to hold on just a little longer. Our people are coming to bring us home." The chains that bound humanity were about to be shattered. The attack came without warning. One moment, the Valorian supply station at Sigma Draconis was operating normally. The next moment, 200 human warships emerged from hyperspace and opened fire with everything they had. Captain Daniel Harper stood at the center of his bridge, issuing orders with cold precision. His ship, the Relentless, led the first wave of the assault. 3 months ago, he had been an explorer who dreamed of peaceful first contact. Now he was a warrior fighting for the survival of his species. "Target their command ship," he ordered. "Fire all weapons." The modified human missiles tore through Valorian shields like they were made of paper. Nicole Barrett's discovery had changed everything. The aliens who once seemed invincible were suddenly vulnerable, and they were not prepared for the fury that humanity unleashed upon them. Admiral Christopher Wells watched the battle unfold from his flagship, the Earth's Vengeance. He had spent months planning this moment, calculating every variable, preparing for every possibility. But even he was surprised by how well his forces performed. "Sir, enemy formation is breaking," reported his tactical officer. Lieutenant Andrew Blake. He was a young man with quick reflexes and a natural talent for reading enemy movements. "They are retreating toward the asteroid field." Wells nodded slowly. "Do not let them regroup. All ships, pursue and destroy." The Battle of Sigma Draconis lasted 4 hours. When it ended, 17 Valorian warships had been reduced to floating debris, and 3,000 human slaves had been liberated from the station's labor camps. For the first time since the war began, humanity had won a major victory. News of the battle spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Enslaved species on 100 worlds heard whispers of humans who fought back and won. Hope, long buried under decades of oppression, began to stir in countless hearts. On Haven's Rest, Ryan Mitchell received the signal he had been waiting for. The moment had finally arrived. "Everyone get ready," he told his resistance fighters. "We move at midnight." The uprising was carefully planned. While Valorian forces were distracted by the space battle, Ryan's people would strike at key targets across the planet. Communication towers, Power stations. The central prison where thousands of humans were held in terrible conditions. Samantha Cole prepared her medical supplies. She knew that many people would be wounded in the coming fight. Some would die. But freedom always demanded sacrifice. "Are you ready?" Ryan asked her quietly. She nodded, her jaw set with determination. "I have been ready since the day they took my hospital and turned it into a prison. Let us end this." At midnight, the resistance struck. Explosions echoed through the dark streets of Haven's Rest. Valorian guards rushed to respond, but they were overwhelmed by attacks from every direction. Humans who had seemed broken and defeated suddenly transformed into fierce warriors fighting for their lives and their freedom. Ryan led the assault on the central prison himself. The facility was heavily guarded, but his fighters had spent months studying its weaknesses. They moved through the shadows like ghosts, eliminating sentries silently before reaching the main gate. "Blow it," Ryan ordered. The explosion tore the gate apart. Ryan charged through the smoke, firing his weapon at every Valorian uniform he saw. Behind him, hundreds of prisoners heard the sounds of battle and began to hope that rescue had finally come by dawn. Haven's Rest was free. Samantha set up an emergency hospital in what had once been the Valorian Command Center. She worked without rest, treating wounds and comforting the traumatized. When she finally had a moment to breathe, she activated a broadcasting system and sent a message across all frequencies. "This is Haven's Rest," she announced. "We are free. The humans have risen. If you can hear this message, know that resistance is possible. Know that the Dominion can be beaten. Know that you do not have to live as slaves." Her words reached billions of ears across the galaxy. On distant worlds, beings of a dozen different species heard her voice and felt something change inside them. The Valorian High Council convened an emergency session on their homeworld. The 12 High Coordinators sat in a circular chamber and had witnessed 40,000 years of decisions, but none had ever faced a crisis like this. "How did this happen?" demanded High Coordinator Velshan, the eldest among them. "Humans are primitives. Their technology is laughable. How have they defeated our forces?" High Coordinator Vethran, who had personally confronted humanity's leaders, remained silent. He was beginning to understand something that his colleagues refused to accept. They had underestimated humans, not because of their technology, but because of their spirit. "We must deploy the Void Hammer," said another coordinator. "Show these animals what happens to species that defy us." The Void Hammer was the Dominion's ultimate weapon. It had the power to crack planets open like eggs, destroying entire civilizations in a single strike. It had been used only once before, thousands of years ago, against a species that no longer existed. Before the Council could vote, new intelligence arrived. A human spy had infiltrated their most secure facility and stolen their darkest secret. Patricia Lang was not a soldier. She was an intelligence operative who specialized in impossible missions. For 3 months, she had posed as a servant in the Valorian Central Archives, cleaning floors and emptying trash, while secretly accessing classified files. What she discovered changed everything. The Valorian Dominion had not always been masters. 12,000 years ago, they were slaves themselves, serving a cruel empire called the Prothean Hierarchy. They had risen up, overthrown their masters, and claimed their freedom through courage and sacrifice. But somewhere along the way, they forgot what they once were. They became the very monsters they had defeated. They enslaved others just as they had been enslaved, repeating the cycle of suffering that they should have ended. Patricia transmitted this information to Earth Command with a simple message. They were us once. Show the galaxy who they really are. Secretary General Shaw received the intelligence with grim satisfaction. Here was the weapon that could shatter the Dominion more effectively than any missile or bomb. The truth. Broadcast it everywhere, she ordered. Let every enslaved being in the galaxy know that their masters are not gods. They are hypocrites who betrayed everything they once stood for. Within hours, the secret history of the Valorian Dominion was known across the stars. Slave populations that had believed resistance was futile suddenly saw their oppressors in a new light. If the Valorians had once been slaves who won their freedom, then freedom was possible for everyone. The cracks in the Dominion's foundation began to spread. Admiral Wells received reports of uprisings on 7 different worlds. Former Valorian allies were questioning their membership in the Dominion. Ship captains were refusing orders. An empire that had seemed eternal was starting to crumble. On the bridge of the Relentless, Captain Harper read the latest intelligence reports with quiet satisfaction. The tide was turning. Humanity was no longer fighting alone. "Sir," said Lieutenant Blake, "new orders from Earth Command. We are to proceed to the Talon system and support liberation forces there." Harper nodded, feeling something he had not felt in months. "Hope? Set course," he ordered, "and send a message to our new allies. Tell them that humanity stands with all who fight for freedom. Together, we will bring this Dominion down." The fire of rebellion had been lit. Now it would burn until every chain was broken, and every tyrant was brought to justice. The galaxy would never be the same. The truth spread like fire through dry grass. On every world controlled by the Valorian Dominion, enslaved beings learned the secret their masters had hidden for 12,000 years. The mighty Valorians, who claimed to be natural rulers of the galaxy, had once been slaves themselves. They had fought for freedom and won, only to become the very evil they had destroyed. Uprisings erupted across the Dominion. Species that had served in silence for generations suddenly found their voices. On the mining world of Korath Prime, workers seized control of the processing facilities. On the agricultural planet of Velshi, farmers burned their harvest rather than feed their oppressors. The great empire that had seemed eternal was tearing itself apart. The Valorian High Council watched their power crumble with growing rage. "This is the fault of the humans," declared High Coordinator Velshan. "They have poisoned the minds of our servants with lies and false hope. We must make an example of them. We must show the galaxy what happens to those who challenge Valorian supremacy." The vote was unanimous. The Void Hammer would be deployed. New Carthage was humanity's most prosperous colony. 20 million people lived on its green continents, building lives full of hope and purpose. They had schools and hospitals, parks and theaters. Children played in streets that their parents had carved from wilderness. It was proof that humanity could create something beautiful, even in the depths of space. The Valorian weapon arrived without warning. Single beam of pure energy struck the planet's surface and kept striking for 3 terrible minutes. The crust cracked open. Oceans boiled away. Cities vanished in waves of fire that rolled across the land like the anger of ancient gods. When the beam finally stopped, New Carthage was nothing but a shattered rock surrounded by clouds of ash. 20 million voices had been silenced forever. The galaxy watched in horror. On Earth, Secretary General Shaw received the news in her private office. She sat very still for a long moment, staring at the report as if she could change its words by force of will. When she finally looked up, her eyes were dry, but her face had aged 10 years. "They murdered 20 million innocent people," she whispered. "Children, families, an entire world gone." Her aide, a young man named Timothy Grant, stood nearby with tears streaming down his face. "What do we do now, Madam Secretary? How do we respond to this?" Shaw rose slowly from her chair. She walked to the window and looked out at the blue sky of Earth, the planet her enemies were threatening to destroy next. "We make them regret it," she said quietly. "We make them regret every single death. And then we finish this war. Admiral Wells addressed the combined human fleet that same day. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, broadcasting to every ship, every crew member, every warrior who had sworn to defend humanity. Today, the Valorian Dominion committed an act of genocide, he said, his voice heavy with controlled fury. They murdered 20 million of our people because they could not defeat us in fair battle. They thought this would break our spirit. They thought we would surrender. He paused, letting the silence stretch across the void. They were wrong. Around him, men and women listened with tears in their eyes and fire in their hearts. Gregory Adams, a lieutenant commander who had lost his entire family on New Carthage, stood at attention with his fists clenched so tight that his knuckles were white. "I am ordering Operation Extinction Dawn," Wells continued. "We will take this war to their homeworld. We will tear down their government. We will end their empire. And we will make sure that nothing like this ever happens again." The human fleet, now joined by ships from 7 alien species who had broken free from Valorian control, began its advance into enemy territory. The battles that followed were brutal and costly. The Dominion threw everything they had at the approaching armada, but nothing could stop the tide of vengeance sweeping toward their core worlds. Captain Daniel Harper led the vanguard into the Crimson Nebula, where the Valorian Second Fleet waited in ambush. The battle lasted 18 hours and claimed dozens of ships on both sides. But when the last missile found its target, the Second Fleet had been completely destroyed. Among the survivors pulled from the wreckage was High Coordinator Vethran himself. His command ship had been crippled in the fighting, leaving him floating helplessly until human rescue teams found him. He was brought before Admiral Wells in chains, the first High Coordinator to be captured alive in Valorian history. "You have lost," Wells told him simply. "Your fleet is broken. Your empire is falling apart. The species you enslaved are rising against you. It is over." Vethran said nothing. He had lived for 2,000 years and seen countless enemies defeated. He had believed the Dominion would rule forever. Now he sat in a human prison cell, facing the end of everything he had built. Dr. Samantha Cole was brought to treat his wounds. This was deliberate. Wells wanted Vethran to experience human mercy, the one thing the Dominion had never shown to others. Samantha examined the alien's injuries without hatred or anger. She cleaned his cuts, bandaged his burns, and made sure he was comfortable. When she finished, Vethran stared at her with confusion in his ancient eyes. "Why?" he asked. "I am your enemy. My people killed millions of yours. Why do you help me?" Samantha considered the question carefully before answering. "Because we are not like you. We do not define ourselves by cruelty. We do not prove our strength by destroying the weak. We show mercy because mercy is what makes us human." She met his eyes with quiet confidence. "You could have learned this lesson 12,000 years ago, when your own people won their freedom. Instead, you chose to become slavers yourselves. That is why you are losing this war. Not because you are weaker than us, but because you forgot who you were." Her words struck Vethran like physical blows. For the first time in his impossibly long life, he saw himself clearly. He saw the monster he had become, the ideals he had betrayed, the cycle of suffering he had perpetuated for millennia. Something inside him broke. Not his body or his mind, but something deeper. The wall of arrogance that had shielded him from truth for 2,000 years finally crumbled. "I have coordinates," he said quietly. "The location of our homeworld. The positions of the remaining Void Hammers. Everything you need to end this war." Admiral Wells was summoned immediately. He listened as Vethran provided detailed intelligence that would have taken human spies years to gather. When the High Coordinator finished, Wells studied him with cautious curiosity. "Why are you helping us?" he asked. "This is a betrayal of your people. Veteran shook his head slowly. No, it is a betrayal of what my people became. Perhaps when the Dominion falls, we can remember what we were supposed to be. Perhaps we can finally break the cycle. He looked at Samantha with something like gratitude. Your doctor showed me mercy I did not deserve. Now I will try to earn it. The fleet prepared for its final assault. The coordinates were confirmed. The target was set. The hour of judgment was approaching on every human ship. Crews made peace with whatever gods they believed in and wrote letters to loved ones they might never see again. They knew the battle ahead would be the hardest they had ever faced, but they also knew that victory was possible. The monster that had tried to enslave them was wounded and bleeding. Its secrets had been exposed. Its alliances had crumbled. All that remained was to deliver the final blow. Secretary. General Shaw broadcast one last message to the fleet before they jumped to enemy space. 20 million souls are watching from wherever souls go, she said. They are counting on us to finish what they cannot. Do not let them down. Bring our people justice. Bring the galaxy freedom. And come home safe. The stars blurred as the fleet entered hyperspace, racing toward the heart of darkness. The end was finally beginning. The skies above Veloria. Prime had not seen war in 40,000 years. The homeworld of the Valorian Dominion was a beautiful planet of purple oceans and silver forests. Great cities rose toward the clouds, monuments to an empire that had once seemed eternal. Its people had grown comfortable in their power, believing themselves untouchable. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. 400 human warships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. Behind them came 300 more vessels crewed by species that had thrown off their chains to join the fight for freedom. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. And every soul aboard had come for the same purpose. Justice. Admiral Christopher Wells stood on the bridge of his flagship, surveying the enemy defenses. Over 1,000 Valorian warships formed a protective barrier around their homeworld. But even they seemed small compared to the combined might of the liberation forces. All ships, this is Admiral Wells, he broadcast. Remember why we are here. Remember New Carthage. Remember the millions who died in chains across this galaxy. Today, we end this. Today, the Dominion falls. The Battle of Veloria Prime began. Energy beams crossed the void like deadly lightning. Missiles screamed through space, leaving trails of fire in their wake. Ships exploded on both sides, their crews dying in the cold darkness between stars. It was chaos and destruction on a scale that defied imagination. Captain Daniel Harper led his squadron against the enemy's left flank, drawing fire away from the main assault force. His ship, the Relentless, had earned its name 100 times over during this war. Now it faced its greatest test. Enemy destroyers closing on our position, reported Lieutenant Andrew Blake from the tactical station. 12 ships coming fast. Harper nodded calmly. Bring us about. Target the lead vessel and fire everything we have. The Relentless shuddered as it launched a full barrage. The lead destroyer vanished in a ball of flame, but the others kept coming. Harper pulled his ship into a tight turn, using a debris field for cover while his weapons were charged. The battle raged for 3 days. Neither side gave ground easily. The Valorians fought with the desperation of beings defending everything they had. The liberation forces fought with the fury of those who had suffered too long under tyranny. Blood was spilled in quantities that would haunt survivors for the rest of their lives. On the second day, the Valorians attempted to use their last void hammer. The terrible weapon powered up, preparing to unleash the same destructive force that had murdered 20 million souls on New Carthage. Andrew Blake saw it happening on his sensors. Without hesitation, he plotted an intercept course. "Sir, I am taking the ship in," he told Harper. Someone has to stop that weapon. Harper understood immediately. Lieutenant, that is a suicide run. Blake smiled sadly. My family was on New Carthage, Captain. I have been waiting for this chance since the day they died. Let me do this. Let me make sure no one else has to lose what I lost. There was no time to argue. Harper clasped the young man's shoulder briefly, then stepped back. You are the bravest officer I have ever served with. Go with God, Andrew. Blake pushed the engines to maximum and drove his ship directly into the Void Hammer's firing array. The explosion lit up the void like a new sun, destroying both the weapon and the hero who had sacrificed everything to stop it. The Void Hammer would never fire again. On the planet's surface, landing forces began their assault on the Valorian capital. Ryan Mitchell led a battalion of veterans who had been fighting this war since the occupation of Haven's Rest. Beside him marched warriors from 7 different species, all united by their shared hatred of tyranny. Push forward, Ryan commanded as enemy fire rained down around them. Take the government district. We end this today. Street by street, building by building, they advanced through the alien city. Valorian soldiers fought back fiercely, but they were outnumbered and outmatched by enemies who had nothing left to lose. Chief Engineer Nicole Barrett led a technical team that boarded the Valorian command station orbiting the planet. While soldiers held off defending troops, she worked to disable the systems that coordinated the enemy fleet. Almost there, she muttered, her fingers flying across alien controls. Just need to bypass their encryption and shut down the central network. An explosion rocked the station. Warning lights flashed everywhere. Nicole kept working, ignoring the chaos around her. Got it, she announced finally. Their command network is down. Every ship just lost coordination with the others. The effect was immediate. Without central control, the Valorian fleet fell into confusion. Ships that had been fighting in perfect formation began to scatter. Captains who had been following orders suddenly found themselves alone, unsure of what to do. The liberation forces pressed their advantage. By the end of the 3rd day, the enemy fleet had been broken. Valorian vessels were surrendering in increasing numbers as their crews realized the war was lost. On the ground, Ryan Mitchell's forces reached the fortress of the High Council. The 12 leaders of the Dominion had retreated here, surrounded by their last loyal guards. It should have been an impossible target to capture, but nothing was impossible anymore. The final assault lasted 6 hours. When the doors finally fell, Ryan walked into the council chamber with his weapon raised, ready to face whatever waited inside. The 12 high coordinators sat in their ancient seats, stripped of their dignity and power. They did not beg or plead or try to bargain. They simply waited for judgment. Ryan looked at them with cold eyes. These beings had ordered the enslavement of billions. They had authorized the murder of New Carthage. They had caused more suffering than any other creatures in galactic history. Part of him wanted to kill them right there. Part of him wanted revenge for everything they had done. But he remembered something Samantha had told him once. Words she had spoken to a captured high coordinator in a prison cell far from here. We are not like you. You are under arrest, he said finally. You will face trial for your crimes. Every species you enslaved will have a voice in your judgment. Secretary General Shaw arrived on Valoria Prime 1 week after the battle ended. She walked through the ruined streets of the alien capital, seeing firsthand the destruction that war had brought. It gave her no pleasure. She had never wanted any of this, but sometimes, she knew, terrible things were necessary to stop even more terrible things from happening. The signing ceremony for the founding charter of the Pativilas Galactic Commonwealth took place in the same chamber where the High Council had once ruled. Representatives from dozens of species filled the room. Beings who had been enemies or slaves just months before. Shaw spoke briefly before adding her signature to the document. "This charter represents a promise," she said. "A promise that what happened here will never happen again. No species will enslave another. No empire will crush the freedom of its neighbors. We will stand together, not as masters and servants, but as equals building a shared future." She looked around the chamber at faces of every shape and color. The Valorian Dominion thought they could chain humanity. Instead, humanity freed the galaxy. Let that be the lesson history remembers. Let that be the warning to any who would follow their path. The charter was signed. The Commonwealth was born. And across 1,000 worlds, beings who had lived in darkness finally saw the dawn. 3 months later, Admiral Daniel Harper stood on the observation deck of his new flagship. The war was over, and the galaxy was learning to live in peace. There was still much work to be done, but for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that the future might actually be bright. Lisa Monroe, his wife now, joined him at the window. She slipped her hand into his and leaned her head against his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. Harper considered the question. "I am thinking about all the people we lost. Andrew Blake, the 20 million on New Carthage. Every soldier who gave their life for this victory. I wish they could see what we built from their sacrifice." Lisa squeezed his hand. "Maybe they can. Maybe somewhere out there, they are watching and proud." Harper smiled slightly. "Maybe." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars spin slowly past. The galaxy had tried to enslave humanity. It had failed. Earth's fury had indeed erased civilizations, but not in the way the enemy expected. The old order of slavery and oppression was gone forever, erased by the fires of righteous war. In its place grew something new, something better. And at the heart of this new beginning stood the species that had refused to kneel. The species that had fought against impossible odds. The species that had shown the galaxy what freedom truly meant. Humanity had found its place among the stars, not as slaves, not as conquerors, but as the light that refused to be extinguished. No matter how dark the night became, the end